All right, and welcome back to the Interruption with Ryan Sargento and my esteemed guest, the only show which allows me to interrupt and nobody else. We have Dan from British Columbia, an American living in British Columbia, back on the show. Thanks, Dan, for being here. And I also have Phil from Florida, who's also an American, back on the show today. Phil, thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
All right. So first topic, we're going to get controversial right off the bat. Abortion. Um, you have pro-life, pro-choice, which the names are misnomers in my opinion to begin with. Um, uh, Dan, let's start with you. What's your view on abortion and your view of how abortion plays in politics?
Why do you say pro-life, pro-choice are misnomers? What's the reasoning behind that?
Oh, it just sounded good. No, I'm just kidding. Um,
That's the reason. That no, that's the actual reason it sounded.
no, because pro-life makes it sound like the other is killing, and some people believe that before a certain point, it's not necessarily killing something because it wasn't alive already. And pro-choice can mean, it means to a lot of people we're giving it their choice, right? But it's much more gray area, back to giving rights to the person's body versus the government deciding it. So that's where I was coming from on that. And my camera is not wanting to function. There
Okay.
we go. But take it away, Dan.
So you changed my thought process on some of the things I was going to say. You said pro-life, pro-choice, and giving the choice back. One of the things that I often in politics and on TV, when you hear people talk about women's rights and women's rights, women's rights, 9 times out of 10, it's followed by abortion. And I think one of the reasons that is because when you talk about women's rights, um, if we're not talking about pay rate, and moving up in corporate America, or the disparities in pay in Hollywood and things like that. Women's rights, typically when it's used politically, is talking about abortion. It's not talking about any of those other things. Um, if we just talk about it politically, it's one of those things, the term political football, that abortion rights are not going to change in America. It doesn't matter who's in power. We've had Republicans and in power with House and Senate, and they did not change the abortion laws. It's used to garner the base and to energize the base. So you got to check off a box. I'm pro-abortion. I'm anti-abortion. They probably don't really care one way or the other. So outside of politics, um, I don't have numbers in front of me, but abortion is affects the Black community um, more than it affects other communities. I don't remember what it was, but I think 25% of abortions are blacks in America. Out of, I don't know how many, but it was something like that. 25%. That's a quarter of all abortions are done in the Black community. And I think in the last 30 or 40 years, there's been 40 million abortions in the African American community, and that's the size of the African American population, right, in the United States. Um, it's not. I don't think it's a coincidence, right? I know African Americans are on the low and economic spectrum, right? Which is why you see those choices being made, and that's understandable. However, if you add in abortion to all the other things America has done to blacks, then it's not a coincidence in my mind. And that is my view on abortion. I think it is a it is a negative. It's had a negative impact on our community. I know there are studies that show that children born in certain types of families grow up to be criminals, and they don't have a good family life, and they end up in the system. And so why?
Wait, you're talking about people who didn't abort their babies and put them up for adoption, or
No, they grow up in the home, but they're neglected, or they
okay,
get taken by child services or something like that,
gotcha.
right? And that's an argument that's made, right? And that's
Right.
an argument that is made against people who are pro-life, like
Like an
don't care.
unwanted baby.
Yeah, like,
Okay.
and an argument is, you don't care about the baby after it's been born, you just want it to be born, sort of thing, right?
Right.
So in my mind, that's gross, right? Like, it's okay to, I don't know when life begins in the womb. Um, there's science is different, but it has had a huge negative impact on our community.
Yeah. No, I
Outside
appreciate.
of that, go ahead.
I appreciate that. The so, but you don't have a problem with people, like you don't consider someone who wears a condom to be committing an abortion, right? What about the morning after pill?
I don't see how that would be abortion, like a morning after pill. Like, I think Catholicism has had a big influence on those views,
Hmm.
right? Contraception and things like that. And I don't think that stuff is accurate. I think you get way out in the weeds on that stuff, right?
Hmm.
I think um, I think when you get past 3 months, I think that is you're killing a life. I don't
Hmm.
think there's any question there. The baby has a heartbeat.
Hmm.
Uh, so,
Is there is
morning
there a
after pills and things like that.
is there a difference between having a heartbeat and scientists being able to determine that um, they still haven't developed the part of their brain that senses pain? So therefore, there's no pain involved. Does that change any aspect? Maybe not the whole thing, but any aspect of it for you?
It's not a crab or a lobster. It's a human being.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed.
It's a human
Agreed.
being.
Yeah.
That here's something. Uh, that argument, I don't know how in the world we as a society has come to that. Um, if someone is in a coma and we can't determine if if we know they're brain dead, that's one thing. They
Mhm.
can't breathe on their own. Their heart, they can't live on their own without the machines. That's one thing. But if we can't determine, you stick their toe with a needle and it doesn't respond. Like, what are we going to say? Well, we can't determine scientifically if he can feel pain. So I don't know where the line is in
Mhm.
that sort of stuff, right? Like, the child or the thing in the womb is alive. It has a heartbeat. If you let it go, it will continue to grow. The arguments aren't convincing enough to me after a certain point, right?
Mhm.
Like, we get to a few days, few weeks after. Like I said, it is what it is. I don't know, but I think abortion. We can do abortions pretty late in the game nowadays. So
Yeah, yeah. And what do you think? Okay, so you mentioned several different things, which are awesome. I like how you mentioned multiple points of view, but in this country, switching to the political aspect, in this country, they just appointed a new Supreme Court judge that many conservatives believe would be willing to help um, change the current abortion laws, right? Um, I know I have family members who vote Republican simply because they are so against abortion. Are you telling me that there's no chance that the Supreme Court, once it had a very conservative majority, would revisit those laws and change precedent? And B, don't they have the ability to change that, even if you don't believe they will?
yeah, they have the ability to, but that would mean there have to be uh, a suit brought to them that they are going to have to oversee. Um, and how many times have they reviewed it? Since once, I think.
Yeah, in the early 90s, I believe.
Yeah, right, once, and it hasn't been brought back to them. I would be very surprised if that came back to them. If it did come back to them, I think they would vote it down. Let me be clear. If it did come back to them, I don't think it will.
You don't think that they would go with precedents where so many of our justices are it's all about precedents.
No, I think it's been a long. I think you have three new court people on there. I think they would vote it down because I think um, if you look at the people who've gone on there recently and look at their record, I think that's what people were concerned about, right? In their writings, you know how a judge will rule based on things they write about and their views on things. They make those clear, right? And so you know how they're going to rule, not only on their past history, but on just they like to muse about things and different laws, and they write and comment on different rulings and things like that around the country and throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you would probably see that. I don't know about the other Supreme Court justices sitting on there. I think you probably get your typical 5-4 in favor of. It's always we lose always just by one, right? It's always it's never like a 9-9 or it's always they voted 5-4 this way or that way. So it'd be something like that, right?
Okay. Phil, same question to you.
Yeah, so on the abortion question, it's funny, three middle-aged guys are sitting around talking about women's bodies, but yeah, I consider myself both pro-life and pro-choice, and I think you can be both. And I'll explain that.
And here's why.
Thank you. So I'm pro mother's life and I'm pro baby's life, but I'm also pro choice of choosing. And how that blends together is I care about the unborn because I'm human. I think we should put value on human life to an extent. I think if we totally dehumanize something that is recognizably us, we run the risk of losing a part of what makes us human, what makes us empathetic, things like that. However, I think appeals to emotion can take that further than it should be taken. So in the case of a mother, her life is to be considered as well, because when you define what life is, there's a couple ways of doing it. You can define it from a biological perspective, or you can define it from an experiential, conscious perspective. Those are two different things. And I think a lot of people combine them all into one. And so you end up getting some black and white thinking when it comes to abortion good, abortion bad. I wish that people maybe were more responsible in realizing that when they consent to sex, they are also consenting to the risk of getting pregnant and the consequences that come with that. A man has no say whether a woman keeps the baby to term or not. That's the woman's choice. So
you're saying in our current system, that's the choice.
In our current system, if she brings it to term, he is liable for the care of that child in some way, shape, or form. And she doesn't get off scot-free either, because she has to carry the child or she has to choose to abort it. So both have skin in the game. Going a little deeper into that, I look at it where I side with a woman's right to choose an abortion comes down to bodily autonomy. Does anybody born or unborn, have the right to use another person's body for life support without permission. And I would say in general, no.
Hold on. You're gonna have to explain that more for our viewers, because life support. What do you mean by that?
Meaning if I need a kidney today, and I know you're a match, and I can't afford to wait for a donor, and I know you're a match, or say a blood, not you, I should say a blood relative. I should say my mom, actually. That's even more pertinent to what we're talking about. So if my mom is a match for me and I need an organ, like a liver or a piece of a liver, I don't have a right to expect her or demand her to give me a piece of her liver or her entire liver, just because if I don't get it, I will die. She has bodily autonomy and rights. And I put the unborn in that category. The unborn, we're not talking about giving them equal rights. You're talking about giving them special rights. When you're saying that a fetus has the right to a woman's body, you're giving them not equal rights, but special rights that you and I wouldn't have to another human's body, even if our life depended on that person's body. So,
Phil, let me add this to you. So, if we're giving the woman the choice to decide, how are we giving the fetus, the baby, a choice to decide their fate as well?
Well, that goes back to the definition of what life means. So, if you're going to define it as something that's biologically living, there's nerve activity, there's circulation. Well, they both have that. If you're talking about experience, consciousness, only one has that. Only one has memories. Only one has consciousness. And
right.
If we're defining life in those terms, there's only one life to consider, and that's the life of the mother.
I think a lot of people, especially evangelicals, would say that the propensity to have life, is a huge deal to them as well.
You mean the potentiality of having a life?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Even if they would agree with you that it's not a life yet, which they might not, but let's say they give you that, hey, this is the potential to be a human being, and you're just snuffing that out because you don't want to have a baby, or you don't want to have responsibility, or you don't have
yeah, I mean, you can say that. I mean, in my opinion, you're snuffing out half of a person every time you masturbate.
okay.
Like the potential for a person, that might be billions of people over the course of your life that will never be born because you chose to do something on the floor.
Well, but there's no egg.
The Bible sees
involved.
it that way.
There's no egg involved, so there's no propensity for it to be a human.
But if you're coming from the standpoint that you should only be having sex for the purpose of procreation, because we have examples in the Bible of a man being struck down dead because he pulled out of a woman when he should have deposited. So you from the moralist perspective, there are Christians who think that sex should only be for the purpose of procreation, because that is the purpose of it, is to create another being. I don't think any of us here today see it that way. I feel like I've strayed off of what.
No, you're fine. I want to get to Dan. Dan, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on what Phil just said?
I don't disagree. I think he's right. I think where, his the right to your body and the right to not be used. How did you put it, Phil? For life support against your own will, right?
Forced life support, yeah.
Yeah, of course, I wholeheartedly agree with that. But Phil, where does that right come from?
Yeah, now we're going back into our old, old discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Where did that right come
I
from,
see what
right?
you did there.
But yeah, I agree with that.
So where does it? Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ryan.
No, I was
I
gonna say,
agree.
so where does it come down to? Because we can have all these beliefs, but what should be mandated by the laws of the United States?
Oh, the United States should. Here's what the United States should do. It's the not United States government or your state's job to protect your life from my life and to keep me from so I can't go around murdering 30 people and no one stops me, right? The state steps in, prosecutes me based on evidence, and I go to the electric chair or serve time in prison, right? It's the state's job to protect that. And it's not their job to decide, that group isn't protected, or they're not protected until they're this age or something like that. It's the state's job. That's what they should step in and do. However, we somehow, not somehow, I know, we are a horrible civilization. We are. We condone the killing of millions and millions of unborn fetuses and numerous other things that we condone, right? Treating people who look different than other people certain ways, and the killing of we're a horrible civilization. And so the government's not going to step in.
But Dan, to me, whether you agree with abortion or not, I believe that if we made it illegal, you would see incredible amounts of suffering of people that are already living and born, versus people that have the propensity to be born one day. And I think I think someone who's alive and born has more.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, so please.
Let me. I kind of got a second wind and thought of other things I wanted to point out. If you're going to take a hard stance on a pro-life position, that any life that has a potentiality for consciousness and well-being has to be protected, I think then you immediately have to stop eating meat, because the animals that you eat arguably have a lot more, they can feel a lot more pain and have a lot more consciousness than the unborn, and the other one is, and Dan started to touch on this, is if you've got a relative in the hospital who's suffered some kind of traumatic brain injury, and it's not clear whether they're going to come out of a coma or not, your pro-life stance, I would think, would dictate that you've got to keep them plugged in to that life support, no matter if it's costing you $100,000 a day to do that. You have to do that because that person potentially could wake up from that coma. You can't say that they, doctors have said before, this can't happen. You're never going to walk again, or you're never going to wake up from a coma, and people do. So if you're concerned about potentialities of life, then you can never unplug grandmother, and you got to stop eating that Big Mac that you like so much. And I don't think people think about those things.
I don't think they think about it either. And I also think that most people don't understand how animals are treated or killed. They think that it's humanely, but there's nothing humane about slitting somebody's throat. Is it less painless? Is it less painful than other methods of killing somebody? Yes, but it's not humane because you would never do that to a human, right? And so I hate the word there, but that's a whole. We're approaching a different topic there as well, which is a great topic. As far as unplugging grandma, I believe in Oregon you have euthanasia. But that's a little bit different topic than just somebody who's brain dead, right? That's somebody who is choosing to do it.
Right. So,
but it always strikes me, and I know this is a little bit nuanced, but it always strikes me when someone has a pet that they love, and they've known them for, had them 14 years, and it's so decrepit and just in pain and agony, and they go put it down, and that's okay. But a human, no, that's a creation, and we can't do that. And I realize I'm mixing some topics here, but I think it goes back to your point, Phil, where if we're okay with one thing, why are we not okay with the other?
Yeah. And I wanted to ask Dan about something he said in his opening. I'm curious what, Dan, you think about how abortion has negatively impacted the Black community versus if abortion was illegal and it was never an option for the Black community. How have they suffered more with abortion rights than without them?
I think our population in the United States would probably not be double, but we'd probably have a few more million people running around. Population in the United States for African Americans, I don't think has changed very much in 30 years. Somebody can fact check me on that, but I think it's hovered around 41, 45 million, and it doesn't go up, right? The Hispanic population, and I believe the white population has actually gone down because they're not having children, but Black people have children at the rate of Hispanics. Like we absolutely do, but our population isn't growing.
And,
right?
and
how is having more people a measure of well-being?
It's not necessarily a measure of well-being. African Americans historically have been a very religious people, right? And you live in Florida, so if you drive around in any big cities like Tampa or Orlando, and you go find those Planned Parenthood buildings, and you tell us where they're at. Tell us where those Planned Parenthood buildings are. Not all of them, but they're gonna be in the poor neighborhoods.
And Dan, those they were created, started too in Black neighborhoods.
I don't know. Probably, I don't know that, but
yeah, no. To my knowledge, to the information that I have, I'm happy to be proven wrong, but to my knowledge, they were even created to start in those neighborhoods as well. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's all. I think
so. It disproportionately affects people of color because its access is so much greater, right?
Yeah, it's not healthy, right? It's not healthy for any people to think that that's this is an option and this is a continual option. I don't think I don't think white people think that way, right? I could be wrong, but I think in general, growing up, that's a regular thing. Like that's an occurrence. Like 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 people talking to me back in the day, like blah blah blah. And as a young kid, like a teenager, I'm like, man, like that's like how many in the last few years is that? You know what I mean? Like it's a regular thing, and you don't really realize it until you get older and you gain more experiences and you read more things where you're like, that's not good, right? That's a bad mindset to have. That it's a form of birth control, and it's the worst kind. It's a mindset that your offspring are expendable, and it's I think it goes along with all the other things that our community suffers with in how we view ourselves, how we think other people view ourselves, this back of the bus syndrome that we tend to have, and a number of other things that this is an acceptable thing in our community. And if you talk about it, like Kanye West talks about it, people say horrible things about him, right? Where he's pointing out some very important issues and it's like a lot of things that have been trained in our community. We've been trained to think this is okay. It's not okay, right? But how do you break those cultural chains.
Yeah, I kind of agree with, the cheapening of human life is a bad thing. And there's a lot of things that can cheapen human life. It can be extreme poverty. It can be lack of education. It can be, you know, uh, getting abortions just whenever you feel like it, and not properly planning. All those things can, cheapen one's view of life. But I want to give a little bit more context to why, or possibly why, Planned Parenthoods are in these communities. I've been in some of them, and they provide a lot more to the community than just abortions. They're often, for
That's
poor
true.
communities, the stopgap is the place where women get their health care. It's where they get their birth control. It's where they get a lot of things more than just abortions. I think it's become a right wing talking point to refer to these places as just abortion clinics, when the vast majority of services that go on there have nothing to do with abortion. And so they're there to serve an underserved community. And I just want to make the case that if they didn't have access to this, women of color might be having so many children that they could never bring themselves out of poverty. They could never better their life. They could not get an education. They could not do some of the things that they need to do to better their lives. And so that's why I'm asking, for, hard evidence of access to abortion not being a bad thing in those communities, where I look at it as potentially being a positive by lifting the yoke of lack of options to poor people. And so that's why that's where I was going with that questioning is, these people that are having the abortions, some of them, their lives are fraught with a lot of challenges, and maybe they haven't been given the education or the love that they need to make better decisions. But do we want those people bringing more people into the world just like them? And I say that about whites too.
And when you
matter-
say just like them, you mean not having the same opportunities as other people?
Same opportunities, or even the same values. See, that's what generally you get your values from your parents. And what I want, when I see white people that we call white trash, so to speak, when I see them multiplying, I see a creation of another generation of impoverished living and thinking and being. This is starting to get a little eugenics, I guess, here, which I don't really want to.
Too late. It's too late. You already went there. It's too late. It's already. Look, that is the whole point. Like you mentioned, that's not the things they do now, but that was the point of its inception. You can't get around it. That was the point. It wasn't to target Black people, but it was to target mentally challenged people. That's its inception. Not a conspiracy theory. Can't get around it. It's literature to target mentally challenged people, right? And like all things, it evolves and spreads into other things. But you can't get around that point. And it is what it is at a certain point, right? So it's doing its job. And you just mentioned it. That's what it's set for, and it's working.
Yeah, I'm not so opposed to it. I guess I don't like the optics. I'm less opposed to, I think less suffering into being brought into the world is a good thing. I think that's a net positive.
I have a question here, and it's a tough question, okay? And I want to make sure that I'm being kind and considerate. But Dan, you mentioned at the front end of the show that it disproportionately affects people of color because people of color don't have this, generally speaking, okay, don't have the same access to generational wealth or education or things of that nature. If you believe that, which I believe it's unequal. We all know, all the studies show, all the research shows that education and poverty lead to higher rates of childbirth. Okay, and I would argue that more often than not, childbirth outside of a marriage. So if the people that are disenfranchised happen to be people of color, wouldn't it make sense just mathematically that those would be the people that would have more abortions? Or not necessarily? Or it goes much deeper?
No, you're right. That's not like, no, this is it's exactly what Phil said. Like Phil said it, and I'm agreeing. Like it's doing its job, what it was meant to do, and I think that's where I have the issue, is because instead of, okay, guys, look, instead of education, wealth, you see people who are more educated and wealthy, they have less children, right? So instead of helping and educating, spreading the wealth, we've set up a system to deal with the undesirables. And tens of millions of people are okay with it. Phil just made a really good argument for it. And the argument he's made is why it exists. That's not it, that people don't like to go into that area, into that conversation, but it's working. And I'm saying, that's why I'm saying we've really fallen off as a society, if we were ever on anything to begin with, right? That's what we've gotten to. And people make this is why I said people makes this women's choice, women's rights argument. And it's some of that, but that's not the issue. It's not for it's not for middle-class white women. You know what I mean? Middle-class white women aren't rushing out in droves to get abortions. It's poor people. It's poor women who are rushing out to get abortions, and we're all okay with it, right?
Yeah, and the middle-class white person has somebody has more resources to raise the kid, or they have extended family that has more resources to raise the kid, right? So
yeah, but who's arguing for abortions all the time? It's not poor black women or poor Hispanic lady on TV or on these marches. It's middle-class white woman or middle-class black woman arguing for women's rights and abortions.
And they're not even the ones having them, you're saying?
They're not even the ones using it. You know what I mean?
They are using it, just not to the ratio that the poor people are, is what you're saying.
Doesn't that bother you guys at any level? Where like, isn't there like a warning nothing goes off in your gut, like this might be an issue, like we don't want to go down this road, but here, like nothing like that goes off in your head?
Anecdotally, I've talked to people that were white, upper middle class, who had abortions, and they were young and hadn't been set up yet financially, right? And they feel absolutely horrific to this day, even though it was 40 years ago, right? And I don't want to make this example make it sound like there's this huge wave of people that are doing that, but I also do believe that there's a lot of people that have had abortions that are of higher social economic status that you would never know had them. But I do, sure. No, but to your point, I do agree that that's probably a lot smaller than people that are a lot lower level social economically. But I haven't even thought about, just to be completely honest, what you talked about today, as far as does that make it, does that bother you or anything? I'm gonna have to think about that, because on its face, yeah, it sounds kind of disconcerting.
Kind of messed up. Yeah. It's kind of messed up. And I mean, what are you going to say to people, right? Like they're going to argue the other side, which is the side we kind of started off with. And you're like, well, here's this whole foundation of the whole issue, and that should give off warning signs to people, like, okay, this is where else does this go? And you do see it bleeding off into other areas
Mhm.
of our politics and how we care for people, right? That mindset bleeds out because that's how societies go. We go in that direction.
Yeah.
Right?
And we got to wrap it up here in a second. Phil, I want you to respond in about 30 seconds, but I just wanted to say, I think ending the propensity for life is horrible at any stage, but late term, and like you said, after 3 months is just horrific to me. What I hate is certain people on certain sides talking about late term abortions when less than one, I think less than a percentage of abortions in the US are late term. I don't think there should be any. But they make this big argument about, oh, late term, but they want to let people abort people on the 35th week. And like that, to my knowledge, that doesn't even exist outside of like an emergency, or something like that. But Phil, I want you to finish up here with the next.
Well, so what we know about happiness in countries, that the freer a country is, typically the happier the country is. And so, we're not talking about making abortion mandatory or making it illegal. We're talking about just having the option, having the freedom to be able to determine which way your life goes. And so I think that for me is the ultimate arbiter of whether it should be something that's legal in this country, is, whether I don't think anybody likes abortion. I don't think anybody is, wants to see anybody have to go through that, but I don't think anybody wants to take that right away either. So I don't, abortion in itself is not good, but choice, I think, in and of itself is good, and I think that's what I would work to preserve is that right and that freedom, because that affects the happiness of, I think, people the most is freedom.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it right there. Dan, thank you so much for being here as always. Phil, thank you so much as well. Next week, we're going to talk about fake outrage. So come back for that on the Interruption with Rian Sargento. You guys have a good night, and we'll see you next week.
Ciao.
Thank you. I didn't think we talked about